Before we started, we were sitting over there arguing about dress codes, and I was trying to explain that I was dressed up for you guys. This is me dressing up. I'm usually in my active wear. No, if there's a video out there called Activewear, you must go see. Thank you very much for having me. I want to post some contact information out there. If you're not on Twitter, you're in education, you're missing out. There's a lot of great information out there. There's a lot of great folks that are posting some amazing things. There's some great research. There's a great network. I've met and have relationships with people because of Twitter that are in education, and we gather at different conferences and talk about the future of learning. I've been involved in a number of projects. So I would encourage you, if you are in education, to pay attention to what's going on Twitter. I also write a blog on education. Great way to get a hold of me, by the way, is on Twitter. As some of you know, my boss and I work at Google, and my boss and I were direct messaging each other the other day, and I said to him on Twitter, like, we have our own system for this, right? And his response back, yeah, but this is the only way I get a hold of you. So there's some good contact information. I've been at Google it's actually 9 years. It's probably when I wrote that bio, it was 8 years, but it's been 9 years. And in the 9 years, I was part of the team that launched Google Apps for Education with the university space. So many universities around the world use Google Apps. I launched Google Apps in the K-12, and today we have 50 million users around the world using Google Apps. And then we part of the team that launched Chromebooks in education, and Chromebooks are doing amazingly well because of the simplicity of how you use that tool, how it becomes a portal into the technology world. And then I'm involved in a bunch of other projects. I'll mention some of those, including the things that we're doing with expeditions, which I think are very relevant to what you guys are focused on. Now, but what I want to talk about is education and why it's so important. Now, Daniel was here on Tuesday night, and I made the mistake of actually watching his presentation. Because usually I have to, I had to follow him, and I'm usually okay with that idea, but not this time. I was blown away. But when we talk about education, I want to explain that idea, because I think it's amazing when you come to, this is my first time in Berlin, right? How many first time in Berlin, right? And you get off the airplane and your computer turns on, right? Your computer just starts collecting all the data and all the information because this is a new place for you. Unlike, when you're at home and you're transporting yourself to work, you don't even know what lights you went through or how you even got to work that day, or you can't find your car in the parking lot even though you just parked it 8 hours ago. You don't know where it is because you don't pay attention. But you're in a new country and your computer just turns on and you collect data. And it's very much like a 1-year-old, right? Collecting that information. And so I was able to get on, I'm at the airport, I'm in the car, I'm watching everything around me. I get here, I watch this incredible speaker, and then I get to go and hang out in his museum. So I got to spend time yesterday in the Jewish Museum and got to see it. And talk about project-based learning, right? Talk about learning. But that's what's amazing about education. It's so important. It's just continuous. It's ongoing. And we're always constantly learning. And to be able to put ourselves into these international spaces gives us an opportunity to learn. But it's absolutely critical that we focus on education. And no matter where I go, no matter what school I talk to, no matter what country I'm in, education is an important topic. It is absolutely the critical component of whatever country I'm in, and so they're focused on education. For me, as mentioned, it's a personal journey for me. It's a personal adventure because I'm a first-generation American. I was born and raised in a place called Hell's Kitchen, New York, not the Hell's Kitchen that you find today, with all the nice restaurants and bars, and if you've been there lately, but the old Hell's Kitchen of the 70s and 80s, the one where you went to go see a play and then you got in your car and your wheels spun out and you got out of there as quickly as possible. People who landed at JFK were given a flyer and it says neighborhoods not to go into, and Hell's Kitchen was always on the top of that list. You didn't go into my neighborhood. It's not the nicest place to grow up. And my mother came from Argentina, like many before her, seeking a better life. And I was born in Hell's Kitchen, single mom, on welfare, food stamps. Showed up at PS 111 and they said, welcome to PS 111, and I said, ¿qué? And so I had to learn English. And spent a couple years in bilingual education until my mother came in and literally like by second grade I hadn't learned enough English, and so she yanked me out of second grade and forced them to put me in an English-only classroom where, through immersion I learned the language a lot faster because I had no idea what was going on. And so there was two ways to get out of this community, right? And these communities still exist in great number today. And one of them was to, play in the NBA. And I don't know why you laugh at that. I can play in the NBA. That's still my goal, is to play in the NBA someday. And then the second way was to get your education. So I put on my reality distortion glasses because it wasn't common to graduate from high school or go to college. And I went to high school, graduated from high school, and then went off to SUNY Brockport, which, where there were days where it didn't snow. And you'd walk out and you'd be like, there's something weird going on. You couldn't figure out what it is, and you realized that it wasn't snowing that day. And so after I graduated from college, I wanted to keep going. And by the way, just as a point of clarification here, no one ever offered me the opportunity to travel anywhere internationally, right? Which is a topic yes, this was 100 years ago when I was graduating from college, but still an important topic to keep in mind that I've been reflecting on, is that no one actually said, this is how you can study abroad, right? No one ever brought that up to me. So an interesting point of view. Not that it's their responsibility, but for kids like me coming from those kind of communities, it is an interesting idea to think about and reflect on. And then I wanted to continue to study and get my graduate degree because, again, I saw the stats and it said that only 13% of Latinos had a college degree, but only 4% had a master's degree. And I'm like, that's not cool. So I went and I went to ASU, where it doesn't snow, and I got my master's in public policy. Now, getting your education is really critical, really important, and I saw that, and it was great for me. And I've had some amazing, I'm standing here in Berlin talking to you guys, right? And I work at Google, and it's just an amazing opportunity. But that ethos of the American dream, right, is that if you work hard and you get your education, you can accomplish anything. And we believe that, and that's what makes America strong. And so we have to continue to provide that for our students. And for me, there was a moment recently that capitalized that idea of what it is to live that American dream. I was asked by the First Lady of the United States to come speak to about 150 high school students in about 100 different organizations about the power of education, the importance of education. And when they invited me, I thought, cool, I'll come speak at the White House. It'll be my third visit to the White House, so I'm an old pro at hanging out at the White House. But when they said, you're going to come speak at the White House, I thought they meant like in some conference room in a basement, right, with like folding chairs. What I didn't know until I showed up was that they were going to ask me to speak in the East Room of the White House. And yeah, so I couldn't understand why everybody else wasn't profusely sweating, right, before they walked into the room. I was sweating. And so I'm standing in the green room. I typically don't get nervous when I speak, but I'm standing in the green room, not the green room like the studio room, but the actual green room. And I'm standing in the doorway that leads to the East Room, and the floor is all marked up, and it's a little black, and you're standing there, you realize, like, this is where every president stands before he walks into the East Room to speak. And I think I almost passed out. But then I walked into the East Room, and then this isn't even lit up compared to what the East Room is, because they have all the cameras and all the photographers, and it's all lit up. And they introduced me, and I walk in, and it's all quiet, and everyone's staring at me, and I'm like, please don't fall, please don't fall. And so I walk up, and I stand in front of the podium like I am here in this picture, and I look out, because I didn't have a chance to prep the room, so I didn't get to see what the room was like. So I walked in, and I noticed that red carpet where the president walks down and says, we killed bin Laden, and walks back out. And I'm like, oh, there it is. I'm saying in my head, there it is. And then I look down, and I'm looking at that microphone, and it's this realization, as being a political science guy and a policy guy, realizing that this is the most powerful mic in the world that I'm standing in front of, right? This is the most and the hoodlum in me, all I want to do is scream out Baba Booey into this microphone. But I can talk about this experience forever. But this is the American dream. But what we want to make sure that we think about isn't just those students that we have in our schools today, because the power of education goes beyond those students that we face in our classrooms. It goes on for generations and generations and generations, and that's the real power that education has. And for me, I can now pass that on to my kids, so I have my kids now, and my daughter hates this picture. Well, she hates it because she assumes that you guys assume that that's her kid, and it's not. That's my kid, so I have a 23-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 1-year-old, and it was at this moment that I realized that I don't actually like kids that much, and that I can only handle one at a time, and so these are mine, and my 23-year-old here, as you can see, is graduating from Arizona State University, and we never talked about college. Right? It never came up. We never had a conversation about whether she was going to college or not. She just assumed she was going to college because I went to college, because her mother went to college, because the people in her world went to college. Right? She assumed she's going to graduate school because I went to graduate school, and she's way too competitive to live her life under the idea that I have a master's degree and she doesn't. There's just no way she can live that way. She assumes I'm going to pay for it, but that's a good problem to have. And literally, I can show you the text messages as of last week, and we're still arguing about her MBA program and that she wants to go get her MBA program, right? So my 14-year-old, he wants to skip college altogether, or he wanted to skip high school, and he just wanted to stay in his room and play League of Legends for 4 years and then go to college. But their point of view, their perspective is so fundamentally different than it was for me, right? It's completely different, and that's the real power that we have with education, is that we can affect not just an individual student, but an individual student's family, an individual student's community, and society in general. That's the real power that we bring to the table with education. So it makes sense that we really, really want to make sure we get it right, that we're doing it the right way, and that we're spending all our brain resources that we can to make sure that we do this right. Now, I'm not on the bandwagon that education is broken. I don't believe that we need to fix education, I get all the rhetoric, and it makes great for the sensational part of what we need to talk about, but the reality is, if you study history of education, education, in the United States, the graduation rate in 1910 was 8%, right? The content that we teach kids today is 1,000 times better than it was 100, 150 years ago, no matter what any of the candidates will tell you about our current education system, right? The United States is a superpower. I'm sitting in Berlin watching the news, and everyone still cares about what's happening in the United States. Is based on the education system that we built for the last 150 years in the United States. And that includes college as well, right? We invented college in the United States in its modern sense, right? With the research and the education component. So it's not that education is broken, it's what we need to do is exactly what we did 150 years ago and ask ourselves, what's the right model of learning for the economy that we're facing? Because it served us well for the economy we faced for the last 150 years. But we live in a different world. We live in a knowledge-based, network-based, global-based economy, and we have to have an education system that reflects that and that prepares students for that world. And we don't live in that manufacturing, factory-based world anymore. So how do we do that? In 1973, 28% of the jobs required some kind of post-secondary education, a college degree at that time. Today, and in the next 5 years, we're looking at numbers that push 60%. And I will say that it's not necessarily a college degree that's required, but we understand that we need more than what we're currently giving our students in that K-12 system. They need some kind of post-secondary education. And so we want to make sure that we're building an education system that reflects that. Now, the role of technology and the role of technology in education, but the role of technology in society in general has grown a lot. And sometimes we don't even notice it, right? Because it's changed in our lifetime, right? How we access information has changed in our lifetime. When I was a kid, I used to have to go to the Columbus Library. This is inside the Columbus Library on 51st Street and 10th Avenue. This is where I went, excuse me, this is where I went to go get my information. And all the books were in here, all the resources were in here. We had these machines with this thing called microfiche, right? Remember those? this is where I had to go get information, and this was the same library that was available to everyone who went to PS111, PS51, PS17, Holy Cross, Sacred Heart, and anyone who lived in Hell's Kitchen. This was our one place for information. And it would close at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, or it wasn't open on the weekends, or you would finally, if you could memorize that 17-digit number to go find that book on the shelf, there was a good chance that that book wasn't there, right? That was our experience with information. And today, we have all the world's information at our fingertips. We have 100 million Columbus libraries right at our fingertips. How do we change education to reflect that, right? Because the education system reflected that old model of how we got to information. How do we now reflect an education system where everything is at our fingertips? And for the most part, I went to my 14-year-old's first day of high school and sat through all his classes, and we're basically still doing the same thing that we did when I was in high school a long time ago. Or even my daughter, who went, and I won't throw the school under the bus, but my daughter got a full ride scholarship to swim at a school in a northern state, somewhere in Minnesota, and she would show up at classes and was told, "I'm sorry, you can't bring your laptop into my class. You can't use my laptop." And she's like, "What?" Like, she's never taken notes on a piece of paper. She has no idea how to even do that, and so all her classes were set up that way. And so she survived there for a semester or two and packed up and came back to ASU. Right? The world has changed, and we haven't had the chance to reflect that into our education system. Now, that doesn't mean that we haven't been talking about technology in education forever. We have, right? Motion pictures were going to revolutionize education. Television was going to revolutionize education. Computers, we've been talking about computers in education forever. I took a computer class in 8th grade because computers were going to be important to my future, even though I had never seen a computer before, and hadn't seen one since for decades. I took a computer class in programming. I learned how to program in BASIC. I wrote about 5,000 lines of code that got printed on a dot matrix printer, and I made a bird fly across the screen on a Commodore 64. Remember that program? I did that, and I took that. But why is it different this time? Why are we talking about technology and education the way we talk about it today? Well, I'm going to propose 3 things. Number 1 is all the science, all the evidence that we have about what good learning looks like, right? We've had and collected, and a lot of it in the universities that you guys represent, a lot of great research on what good learning looks like, how we can make it relevant, how we can make it engaging, how we can make it personalized, how we can bring it to the individual and let the individual drive some of that learning. We have all this research about what good learning looks like. We haven't been able to implement it. And technology gives us an opportunity to implement a lot of these ideas. And so I encourage universities, I encourage folks who are in the education space to look at that research, right? We don't need to collect anymore. We know what good learning looks like. How do we use technology to implement some of those things that we've learned about what good learning looks like? We just haven't had the tools to do this. And we're starting to see the folks take advantage of these tools in different ways, and that's really exciting. 2 is the way in which technology has wrapped itself around the core of our lives, unlike when I was in school and I took a computer class, even though I'd never seen a computer. That's not true anymore today. For example, how many of you have not used technology today? Right. How many of you have not used the web? A couple people can't get online in their rooms, like me. Usually there's one person who raises their hand and they raise it in frustration because their kid used up their data plan and they can't. There's usually at least one person who does that, right? Well, you got to ask yourself, how long did this take us? The iPhone is 7 years old, right? The tablet, the iPad is 4 or 5 years old. The Chromebook is 3 years old. The BlackBerry, God forbid you have a BlackBerry. You pulled that out embarrassingly. You just like hide it. And that's 12 years old, right? Do you remember we used to have to call the internet? Like we used to have to place a phone call to the internet with our home phones. And the internet was busy. hi, you reached the internet, and you're okay. Like, yeah, I tried to call the internet today, and it was busy. And you're okay with that, right? And you know, what's our expectation today, right? Instantaneously, right? And even though you were okay with calling the internet, it being busy, or hanging up on you and calling back again, and then your reward was a bunch of web pages with words, with links to other pages that had words or links, right? That was your big reward. And every once in a while, someone would post a picture on that website, and you'd like get all excited, like, there's a picture coming. I gotta wait like 20 minutes, but there's a picture coming. And today it's completely different, right? My New Year's resolution this year was, I travel a lot, and I got frustrated with the way Wi-Fi behaved on airplanes. It wasn't fast enough for me while I'm traveling at 40,000 feet and 535 miles an hour, right? I've seen teachers and educators, the nicest, most understanding people in the world, turn into mobs with like weapons at conferences if the Wi-Fi is too slow, right? It's completely different. Our expectations change. So if that's true for us, right, what does that mean for a generation of kids that don't know what the world looked like before Google, that don't know what the world looked like before smartphones and tablets and technology, who don't know what the world looked like before Wi-Fi, right? Tell a 10-year-old that there are places in the country, in the United States, or even places in the world that don't have Wi-Fi, and they're like, what? Take me to these ancient places. I will take pictures with my smartphone and post it and post them on Instagram, right? This generation is growing up with technology the way we grew up with electricity, right? No one walked in this room and expected, and we're like, wow, there's lights in here. How cool. We have lights, right? You just expect the lights to work. This generation of kids just expect technology to be there, expect the Wi-Fi to be there. This generation of kids, right, the Generation Z, the new generation, right? I'm a Generation Xer. And I'm sure we have lots of Generation Xers in the room, yeah? And we have Generation Yers, or what I call whiners, wires. and then now the new generation, Generation Z. There's the 1995 to the middle of 2000, or what I call the 9/11 generation, right? The generation that was born in 9/11, like my 14-year-old, who doesn't know that the United States can actually be a country not at war, right? They know a country that's been at war the entire time that he's been alive, who doesn't know what the good times were like, right? Has suffered through 2 economic crashes, and doesn't know what the world looks like without global warming or climate change or any of the other issues that they face. There's 60 million of these, and they're growing up as a real digital natives, right? Where technology is just part of their lives, like electricity and lights. It's just part of who they are. They're growing up differently, and they get a bad reputation, right? They get that reputation that they're not connected, and they don't look at people in the eye, and you know, I'll listen to adults all the time talking about these kids and their technology. They're buried in their technology. When I was a kid, I wasn't doing that. I was out and doing things, and I always want to remind them, like, you mean like this? And it's true that we need to make sure that we convert our students into digital leaders and not just assume that they know what they're doing because they're born digital. But this idea that somehow this generation is different than we are is insane, and that's an important thing to keep in mind. This generation is not different than we are. They're not wired different. You'll hear someone say they can multitask. They can do 2 or 3 things at the same time. They cannot. They do 2 things at the same time poorly, just like we do 2 things at the same time, right? But how they think about learning is different than the way we think about learning, and we have to always keep that in mind. I was sharing this story at lunch today about my daughter, who very creative. She's a storyteller. She's a filmmaker. She's an artist. She likes making music, and she plays instruments. And we were going on one of our annual trips to Hawaii, and she hates to fly. Terrified of flying. So every time we have to go somewhere, I have to come up with a new strategy. And so like any good parent, I usually drug her up and bribe her. And the bribe was that we would go and get sorry, my earpiece here. We would go and get a ukulele because she wanted a ukulele to play. And so we went to go to the store to get one. And keep in mind my role at Google. This is just 3 years ago and what I do. And we're walking out of the ukulele store, and I noticed in the corner of the store instruction books and videos on how to play the ukulele. And so I said to her, hey, do you want to pick up a book or a video on how to play a ukulele? And she looked at me like I was insane. Why? How is she going to learn to play ukulele? Right, she's going to watch YouTube videos. And if she's going to get into a more formal, like she wants to play ukulele, for her rest of her life as a profession, that's a different story. But for her to get the basic knowledge, she's going to go to YouTube and she's going to learn how to play the ukulele. My 14-year-old comes up to me last year, he comes up to me showing me wants me to QA his lines of code because he taught himself how to code in Java. Because he plays Minecraft and he wants to learn how to code, and so he taught himself. Never asked me where to go, never took any formal training, just learned how to code because he took a couple of classes on Khan Academy, and him and his friends worked on a project together and set up a server and now have a whole server farm and a casino. And I tell him I know that one day the FBI is going to come busting through my door for some reason, but that's what he does. So we have to keep that in mind. We almost have to put it on a Post-it note and keep it in front of us on our computer screens. This generation thinks about learning in a different way than we think about learning. And so when we think about this generation that's grown up with technology, obviously they look at the world in a different way. Northeastern University did an amazing survey. They talked to a bunch of 16-year-old, 19-year-olds to get their sense or their ideas about things. And even that 16 to 19-year-old time frame is different than the 13 to 15 or 12 to 15. That's even a different group. But even that whole group as a whole, they talked to these kids about how they see the world and what they see, and they came up with some fascinating things. For example, 42% of them expect to work for themselves in their lives, right? Compared to 11% of Americans who actually do, right? But it's a lot different because any two kids can pick up a laptop, get some server space, and they're off and running, right? And so when we think about that, and 42% of them want to work for themselves, the idea of college and career ready, what does that even mean, right? College and career ready. Again, the way we think about the world and how we have to prepare kids for jobs. And kids are saying, no, you have to prepare me for life. I'll worry about what kind of job I'm going to do, right? You're preparing me for some company that I might not even go work for, right? And so they're thinking about work in a completely different way, and we have to keep that in mind. And we were talking about this at lunch as well. If you look at this generation of kids who want to work for themselves, what a better international opportunity than to go to another country to learn about what's happening in that country and potentially come up with businesses for that country or take ideas from that country and bring them back to the United States. Like, what an unbelievable opportunity to do something like that, right? And so we have to think about this differently. This generation of kids thinks about about a job in a different way, because 64% of them are worried about getting a job of any kind. Right? Because they watched, again, the post-9/11 generation, they watched a generation, they watched their parents struggle to having 2 or 3 different jobs or losing jobs and getting laid off. They watched their sisters and brothers go to college, and then even though the statistics will tell you, and they're very clear, and I'm a big proponent of kids going to college, especially low-income kids or poor kids or minority kids, because you look at the numbers and it's clear, right? You get a high school degree, you make $30,000 a year. You get a college degree, you make $45,000 a year. The numbers are there, but these kids saw their siblings come home and live at home for a couple of years because they couldn't get a job right away. Their reality might be different than the statistics that we see, and so we have to pay attention to that. So how do we take advantage of the fact that they're worried about finding a job? How do we provide them opportunities to think about work in a different way? 52% of them play video games for at least an hour a day, and we know that number is soft. And then we also think about video games in a different way, right? We played video games. I'm a gamer. But there's a huge difference between making some yellow ball go around a track, eating other little ghosts and balls, and thinking we're somehow strategic in how we do that, right? Compare, when my 14 watches me play Miss Pac-Man, he just watches that and goes, that's it? That's what you do? That's the most ridiculous thing in the world, right? It's like the snake game on the Nokia phone. That's how he sees it, right? Where he's playing video games that are completely more complex. He tries to teach me, I have no idea what's going on, right? And he's playing with 5 or 6 people online, and he's playing in a collaborative way, and they all have roles, and they do things, and they compete, right? He's looking at college and thinking, which college offers gaming scholarships, right? Which college, forget sports teams. I was at Penn State this week and talking to Penn State, and they think that football attracts kids to go to the school. Have you ever seen a League of Legends tournament? And how many kids go to one of those tournaments? My kid wanted to go to London this year. He literally wanted me to send him to London by himself if he had to. Not to visit London, but to go to the World Games, the League of Legends World Games that took place in London, right? Completely different mindset when we think about what video games are. We look at the fact that 81% believe that college degrees are extremely important. They still see college. Compare that to the 70% of Americans who think that college degrees are important. The problem is that those 70% are probably the ones who already have college degrees. I'm always careful when someone says kids don't need to go to college, and it's usually coming from someone who actually went to college. I always find that surprising. But 81% believe that education is important, that higher education is important, but they also see it in a different way in the sense that unlike when we went to college and we majored in something, right? And there was a good chance that we ended up doing something completely different, and that was okay. This generation of students don't see that. They see the opportunity to go to college as a legitimate thing to get them to move to somewhere else. And they want to build financial skills, entrepreneurial skills, competency-based skills. They think that colleges should significantly change what they're offering to their classrooms. And we're starting to see evidence as to why, right? Not only the evidence of what good learning looks like. New York Times recently had an article from my friend Annie Murphy-Paul, who wrote an article about lecturers and whether lecturers are biased and culturally significant and what we need to do with that, especially if we want to increase the number of diversity students in our schools. They see that colleges should significantly change what they're offering because of the world that they grew up in. And so 72% feel like they should be allowed to design their own course of study. But here's the thing, we already do that in most universities, right? You can design your own course of study. So where's the disconnect that we have with these students to provide them that information, right? That no longer, unlike us, you can come to ASU and and major in political science, right? As opposed to you can come to ASU and design your own program of study, and you can design a program of study forever, right? When I was at Penn State, I mentioned to them during the Q&A, why did my daughter went to ASU, and so I was talking to ASU with this answer, but why did you drop my daughter? She graduated, you sent her some newsletter for the Alumni Association, gave her a discount for the first year, and that was it, right? Why aren't you connected with her for the rest of her life? Why aren't you providing services for her for the rest of her life? And all the data that we're collecting with individuals and people, if you have that flashlight app on your phone, right, that knows where you are. It checks your location like 8 times a day, right? Your college has no idea where you are. Why? The flashlight app knows where you are, but your college has no idea what you're doing, right? Doesn't make any sense. So how can we help these students think about college in a different way where they can create a lifelong program and where colleges are providing them that lifelong program? And of course, because of the way they're growing up, they will look at technology and at websites to review where kids are going after they graduate from your school, right? We didn't have this information for us. We had an alumni service, but these kids can go on LinkedIn and they can see how many kids from ASU went on to become CEOs. They can see how many kids went to Penn State and became doctors. They can actually see the numbers. They want outcome-based experiences, right? They want to drive to an outcome. They want to see that experience. And so when we talk about these students and what they're focused on, you can see that the skills are really critical, right? And we understand that most of the time, the jobs that these guys are going to end up, our kids are going to end up doing, don't exist today. And so one of the questions that we ask our students all the time that needs to go away, and this is like the thing that I focused on more than anything, is I cringe anytime someone asks my 14-year-old, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? We're still asking our kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? And when I think what we should be asking our kids is what problem you want to solve, right? Because one, there's a good chance that the jobs don't exist, and two, we don't live in a world where there's like 10 jobs, right? Where you could be a lawyer or a doctor or an architect or an engineer, or, right? You know, how does my 14-year-old know what a biomedical engineer does, or someone who works with sustainable living materials, right? Or someone who works in completely different realms of micro machining and all the things that are happening in that space. Right? So if we ask our kids what problem you want to solve, we get them to think about what are the knowledge, the skills, and abilities that they need to solve that problem. And it doesn't have to be world hunger, right? It doesn't have to be some global issue. It could be making blenders quieter, which is a problem you think that we would have figured out by now. But we want to make sure that we're focused on giving them that direction where they can define, you know, their autonomy, their purpose, their mastery, right? How do we help them do that? To focus on the problems. What are the skills that you need? Who can you collaborate with? Who should you be following? What country and what people in those countries are focused on those issues? How do you go connect with them? How do you collaborate with them? How do you work on projects together? What research should you be reading? You have all the world's information at your fingertips. How do we take advantage of that and the fact that they don't know any better? We want to make sure that students are focused on continuous iteration. We live in a world of continuous iteration. If you used Google last night and use it again today, there's a really good chance you use a different version of Google because we update it like 600 times a year, right? If you use Google Apps, we update Google Apps 200 times a year, right? We live in a world of constant and continuous iteration. There is no endpoint anymore, right? Getting a B in a class doesn't make any sense. We were mentioning this as well at the table. At Google, we don't require college degrees anymore, right? We require competency. And so how do we get to competency? We get to competency through continuous iteration. We want to make sure that kids are building collaboration skills. You know, Google is a global organization. I have team members who work in London and in Zurich and in India and in Mountain View and in Phoenix and in New York. We're a global organization. How do we collaborate on a global scale? And real collaboration, because we say collaboration in education, but we don't mean it, right? Education is a single-player sport, right? It's my kid who is responsible for his homework, his grades, his assignments, and then we say, go work with others. Good luck. We live in a team-based world, right? And we all know that. And so how do we make sure that we're helping our kids build real collaboration skills? Imagine handing out a test, and I'm not talking about, you know, a good assessment. I'm talking about like a typical test that you hand out in a freshman class or in ninth grade or wherever you are, and at the end of that test, two kids come up to you holding the test together saying, we decided to combine our skill set and work on this together. What would your reaction be? Right? When did collaboration become cheating? And when did we start teaching our kids that collaboration was cheating? Right? When did we start putting that into their minds? And so real collaboration is the ability to listen. Real collaboration is the ability to ask good questions. Real collaboration is the ability to understand that your part is part of a greater sum and that together you create something. Like I live in comfort knowing that I work with a team and we're all creating different parts of the same solution and that I'm not doing it alone, right? Real collaboration is the ability to change your mind by listening to an argument or a point of view. Real collaboration is the ability to build consensus, right? We look for leadership at Google, and what we really mean is the ability to build consensus, right? Leadership is not, you're doing this because I told you what to do, right? Real leadership is to bring people along with you, right? And it's usually from behind because you're usually pushing them in a direction. So we want to make sure that we're focused on building real digital skills. Now, the good news is that we don't have to do this in our classrooms anymore where we have to get kids to memorize things because we have already taken care of that problem, right? There's a good chance that if you think of if there's something that you have to memorize, there's a good chance Google already has it. Not that we don't have to have kids memorize things. I believe that we do, and they have to remember things, and we have to test them, and we need to do assessments. But some of the way we ask those questions in our classroom have changed. I saw back in February that there was a survey that said that 7% of Americans can name you the first 4 presidents of the United States. And that's an interesting stat. And so should you be upset by that stat? Or should you not care about that stat? Or does it matter one way or the other? Now, the vibe in the room just changed, especially here in the front row, because you think, because I can point to one of you, and I ask you to name me the first 4 presidents, and if you don't know, you're going to be the person who's embarrassed for the rest of the day because you didn't know who the first 4 presidents are, and people are going to make fun of you even though they didn't know who the first 4 presidents are. They just didn't get called on, right? Or I can give all of you 30 seconds, and all of you can tell me who the first 4 presidents are. So information is a commodity. Information has no value. What has value is how we take that information and convert it into intelligence. And how do we help our students convert information into intelligence, especially at the way it's coming at them, because the information is coming at them hard and fast, and we have to help them build strong digital leadership skills, right? So it's not who are the first 4 presidents. The better question that I would ask a student is, tell me what the United States of America would look like if the 4th president was the first president. Tell me what the United States of America would look like if the 3rd president was the 2nd president, and so forth and so on. Tell me what are the 4 things that the first 4 presidents believed in together. What are the 4 things that they disagreed on, and who won and why? All of a sudden, you get into a deeper meaning of something, and guess what? You still have to know who the first 4 presidents are, as opposed to memorizing who the first 4 presidents are, right? It changes things. So we have to think about how technology impacts what it is that we do in our classrooms. And obviously, we want to make sure that we're building strong digital citizens and strong global citizens. This is a picture of my wife when her and I visited Africa. And I went to Africa and spent a month and a half in Africa because she had lived in Africa during she went to Santa Clara and did in high school, she did a 6-month gig somewhere. In college, she did a gig in Switzerland and did one in Africa. And I was drawn to that. And then I had to go see what Africa was about and spend a month and a half there. And we want to build strong global citizens, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it gives us an opportunity to get them to think about the world from a different perspective. And that's absolutely critical, given the fact that we live in a network-based global environment. Now, we need to rethink what learning looks like, and we're starting to see this happen around the world in different formats. We're starting to see more student-empowered learning models where the student gets to drive some of their learning. They're using technology to support. We're starting to see more collaborative teaming going on in K-12, where I think most of the innovation is happening. We're starting to see a stronger push into what the role of the teacher is in the classroom. And just recently, the Obama administration started to de-emphasize the whole testing world. And I think I've been talking about this for years, but we're starting to see that now. And so now there's more emphasis on what it is that we're teaching in our classrooms and how do we teach that. Gives us an opportunity to provide professional development for teachers in lots of different ways. And so we want to make sure that we're starting to focus on providing that for our teachers and educators, because at the end of the day, when that room closes, nothing is more important than having a great teacher in the classroom, because technology can't replace teachers, right? Mentors, empowerers, people who do amazing things for our kids, great coaches. That's what we need our teachers to become. We're starting to see this emphasis on a push to global competency-based education, where kids are actually designing things, and they're asking for this in their education, where they're taking what they learn and implementing it. And nothing gives them a better opportunity to do that than being able to travel around the world and spend time and learning in different countries and different cultures, and being able to build those competency skills in lots of different ways. And we're starting to see a breakdown in some of the barriers that are classroom, where everything happens inside of a classroom, right? At Google, we have a new project called Expeditions, where we're taking Google Cardboard and being able to provide virtual reality trips for our students and virtual reality experiences if they can't get to those certain locations. And yes, I agree with Daniel, being there in person is the best way of doing things, but that's not the opportunity that many kids face. Also, how do you bring a kid into a coral reef to study the sea and the ocean, right? Virtual reality gives us an opportunity to do that, and we're starting to see that breakdown. And we're starting to see a lot of experimental learning models focused on new learning. This is a picture of me and a bunch of folks from the Phoenix Union School District. We're building a new school. It's an inquiry-based school where programming will be the language that kids learn for 4 years while they're in school. And they're learning those skills inside their traditional subjects. So they're learning coding and biology, and coding and history, and coding and everything else. And they're going to learn how programming affects all those different components. And they're going to graduate high school in learning one or two and being able to code or program in one or two different languages. And the interesting question in 4 years is going to be, where do they go after that, right? And do they have to go to college, right? That's a whole other problem, that a consequence that we see coming. So what we need, as I finish up here, by the way, we're going to have some time for Q&A, so think about some questions that you might have. What we need more than anything here is a culture shift, right? I often talk to educators that, I get the question, what does the future classroom look like? And I think this is the most ridiculous picture I've ever seen in my life, right? This is supposed to represent what the future classroom looks like, and it looks like a regular classroom, right? It basically looks like this, right? And so what we need more than anything in education is a culture shift to think about education from an innovation and iterative perspective. How do we constantly change? How do we constantly iterate what education looks like? That there is no one model. There is no future classroom. I'll give you a quick Google example of what this looks like. This here is the original Google.com. This is how it started, right? This is a bunch of machines put together. And they are learning, Larry and Sergey are doing computer science, and they're doing programming, and they're doing search in a completely different way. This is how Google started at Stanford. And then this is what Google looks like today. This is just one row of the gazillions of rows of data of servers that we have and how we process information. And we write our own software, our own hardware, we code everything ourselves. We would be the largest manufacturer of servers if we sold them, right? But two important things to point out here. Number one, this is not what Google looked like on Monday, and then this is what it looked like on Thursday. This took 17 years of exactly what it is that we need and what we're talking about here. Communication, collaboration, problem solving, critical thinking, innovation. There is no data center of the future. There's just a data center of what one looks like today. Because the second point is that this is not what a data center will look like in 17 years from today, right? If it does, we're dead. We have to constantly iterate and constantly change how we process information, and the same thing is what we need to do in school. Now, the good news is that we're just getting started. This is the very beginning of this. Keep in mind that in 1995, 1% of the world was online. It took 10 years to get to the first billion people. It took 5 years to get to the second billion, and 4 years to get to the third billion. And even then, we are still only at 40% of the world's population having access to the internet. We are at the very beginning of this. So I want to leave you with this closing thought as you think about what questions you might have. I want you to think about a 5-year-old. I know you're might be far removed from a 5-year-old in what you do is for a living, but I want you to think about a typical 5-year-old. And then when I asked you how many of you had not used technology today, I want you to think about that technology, right? Whether it's your new smartphone or your new iPhone or iPhone SCP Plus, whatever they're calling them. For me, it's what my wife calls my mini tablet, right? This is a Nexus 6. And I want you to think about this technology, and I want you to think about that 5-year-old and realize that this is the worst technology that 5-year-old will ever see in their life. This is their Commodore 64. They're going to be, in 20 years, they're going to be 25 years old, and they're going to be hanging out in San Francisco, being hipsters, and they're going to go into the thrift store, because apparently that's where hipsters go shopping, and they're going to find this phone in a 50-cent box. And they're going to buy it because they want to bring it home and put it on their wall or on their shelf like a museum piece, the way I have a StarTech 3000 on my shelf as a museum piece. And they're going to think about it. They're going to tell their friends. They're going to remember, because you start remembering things when you're 5 years old. And they're going to say, my dad used to have one of these. And they're going to reminisce. They're going to remember and think, oh, my God, guys, he used to have to plug this into the wall. Like every day. Those are the kids who are coming to our schools this year. Those are the kids who are going to be coming in with a completely different set of expectations, a completely different experience that we've had. Are we preparing the right education system for them so that they can identify the problem that they want to solve, that they can identify how to build the knowledge, the skills, and abilities that they need to solve that problem? Are we giving them the opportunity to explore the world because they're living in a global environment? Are we giving them the opportunity to build the knowledge and help them convert information into intelligence, all the things that they need to do? That's the challenge that we have in front of us. That's what we are facing, and I hope that folks in this room can help us build that. Thank you very much.
That was great.
Thank you.
Really good. Thank you, Jamie. So we have a couple minutes. If there are any questions from the audience, I know this isn't a shy audience, so please share your thoughts and queries with our guest.
Sure.
Got a mic over there.
Hi, thank you for a great presentation. My big question is, as an educator, I don't do it for the paycheck, and Google gets a big paycheck, and it's an economic institution, whereas ours are, well, we're for education, not necessarily economics. And is there the rapid growth of Google, is that a fair model for a rapid growth in changes in education? I'm sure you've thought a lot about this.
Yeah, and that's
That's
an interesting question, because I think that what Google is set up to do is very similar to what an education system looks like, right? Or we have a campus. There's people at Google who don't even have their own apartments. They just live on campus because everything's provided for them, right? A lot of them come right from college and come right to Google. We have campuses, we have teams, we have all the services and amenities that most colleges have. I think that what drives us is what drives most universities or most institutions of learning is that we're trying to solve problems, right? And so we hire people who are interested in problem solving, that want to help come solve problems. I think the idea that I want to make sure I emphasize is that technology is not the silver bullet, right? Great education is the silver bullet. Technology is there to support and enable. And so what separates us from other companies who have access to the same technology, who have access to the same tools that we have, I think what separates us is our desire to problem solve, our desire to iterate and change and constantly grow. And I think that model works in that context, right? When you think about what it is that we want to provide to our students. I would also argue that in education, our job has more meaning, right? Because we're affecting and impacting kids, as opposed to some other economic driver of making more widgets or whatever it is that most people do. So you would think that the drive to innovate and iterate because of kids is even more, is stronger in education.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes?
Thank you. My name is Serine Jai. I work for CIEE in Senegal. Thank you for a good presentation. We clearly realize that there is a digital gap, not just between people from different generations, but we can see that this gap exists in terms of people who have access and people who don't. Mm-hmm. I mean, access is already good, but most people who have access to technology use it as a factor of consumption. They are consumers. Mm-hmm. And my question to you is, how do you turn, what are your thoughts about making access not just a factor of consumption, but turning consumers into producers, given the fact that the language that is used in technology is language that most people don't have access to? I know Google has made efforts in turning their interface into different languages, like Wolof in Senegal, you can access it. But the thing is, most people don't even have access to it simply because it is in a language that they don't understand. Right. What are the efforts that you make in order to change that? Right. And another last thought, I smiled, excuse me for smiling, when you talked about your efforts in Africa as opposed to the other countries. Obviously, there are different countries in Africa that we all know. But what is Google doing in countries like those that are in Africa to make the access more, I would say, democratic? I think for Google and for I'm sorry, I'm just swallowing my words here. What are you doing in countries like those in Africa to make consumers turn consumers into producers, basically, into technology. Thank you.
So let's unwrap some of that there, because there's a couple of things. Number one is I agree with you that what we need to do is avoid a generation of, sorry, my mic keeps falling, is to avoid a generation of consumers, right? That we have to help kids become creators. And I think that's our responsibility all the way down into the K-12 level. Why do we assume that just because they're born digital natives that they know exactly what they're doing? Right? We have to teach them how to do this. And part of the problem is that most of us are terrible at it, right? We were sitting there minding our own business, right? And someone said, hey, there's this thing called the internet. You should check it out. I'm like, oh, cool, the internet. I can get different sites. And then someone said, oh, here's a site you should try, Amazon. I'm like, oh, Amazon.com. I'll bookmark that. I have all 8 sites, right? We were sitting there minding our own business. We used to sell books that told us about websites, right, at one point. And then all of a sudden, the internet just kept coming at us and kept coming at us. So we never really learned how ourselves to be creators in this space. Some of us are just getting good at this. So most of us are consumers. So if we're not good, you're all terrible searchers. I've seen the logs. If we're bad at searching, how is it possible that we're ever going to teach our kids how to search, how to vet, how to make sense of information? I mean, think about this for a second, right? No matter how hard, if you have someone who's between the years 10 and 14 or 15, like I do, and no matter how hard he tries, and he's trying really hard, he'll never be able to watch every video ever made on YouTube, right? We upload 100 hours of video every minute, right? How can we teach them to make sense of that information and to vet and to research and to do things? That's our job, to teach our kids how to do that. We have to do that as early as possible, and I don't see that happening anywhere, right? So that's first, right? We need to teach our kids how to search, how to vet, how to make sense. Now, the second part about access is absolutely critical, not just in the United States from rich school districts having access and poor school districts not having access. That's a whole issue in K-12. On a country basis, it is a problem, but there's also, I said 40% of the world is online. I think that number will start slowing down because the rest of the world is hard to get to, right? And how do we get there? And so our efforts, among others, are to try to bring that access in different ways and to think outside the box. And so there's a project that you can look up called Project Loon, L-O-O-N. And what we're doing is launching balloons into space to provide continuous access to remote areas. So we are working on it. In the United States, we have a project called Google Fiber, where we're bringing fiber connectivity to major metropolitan areas and providing fast bandwidth capabilities for low-income housing and low-income people for free, right? So we're giving them 7 years of broadband speed for the cost of construction, like $300 or $30, whatever it ends up being, and they get broadband for 7 years for free. So we are making efforts in the space because it is a good business model for us, right? We want people online. It's good business, and so we are trying different things. So we have, whether it's Google Fiber, whether it's Project Loon, whether it's a couple of drone programs that we bought and a couple of other robotics programs, we're continuously working on that. But again, we are just at the very beginning of what we can do and the capabilities to bring access everywhere. In the meantime, we need to start teaching our kids how to search. We need to teach our kids how to look for information, how to be creative people. And if we're not asking them to create things with technology, why would they, right? So if they're not learning these skills in school, where are they going to learn how to do these things, right? So absolutely critical. I agree with you.
Well, I think I'm sorry, we don't have time for any more questions.
I'll be hanging out for a little bit,
He'll
so if
be
you want to
here.
come up and chat.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.